Hello, everybody. We're in the second section of our afternoon event, and I'm here to welcome Claire Fontaine. Claire Fontaine is a collective, conceptual, and feminist artist collaboration funded by Fulvia, Carnevale, and James Tornhill in Paris in 2004. Since 2017, they have lived and worked in Palermo. Present in numerous museum collections, Claire Fontaine articulates a space of resistance within the art world, opposing the transformation of artistic authorship into brand identity and the homogenization of formats and content in times of censorship and crisis. The 60th edition of the Venice Biennale, titled Stranieri Ovunque, is that good? Foreigners Everywhere 2024, took its name from the collective series Foreigners Everywhere, including a large-scale installation of 60 neon works suspended above the lagoon in the Giardini, or the, is that?
The Arsenale.
On the Arsenale, okay. Okay. Their work was also present in the Giardini and the Arsenale, as well as the Vatican Pavilion exhibition With Your Eyes, installed inside the functioning women's present at the Giudecca. Anthologies of the writings have been published in English, French, Italian, Portuguese by Semiotext, Diaphanes, Derive Aprodi, and Glac Editions. The first critical study of their practice and philosophical position, Claire Fontaine, a user manual by Anita Chari, was published by Lens Prints in 2024. In 2025, Claire Fontaine was awarded the project by the Italian Cultural Institute in London. Show Less, whose first part was presented in the Mimosa House and will open at the WOW Foundation in Rome in 2027, alongside a retrospective curated by Julia Byron Wilson. Claire Fontaine will speak about AI and general intellect. I will be focusing on the humanization of AI and the mechanization of humans, on the concept of experience and its crises, and the difficulty of understanding the very idea of truth in the presence of language and image-producing non-human subjects. Let's give a big hand for Claire Fontaine.
Thank you, Warren, for having me here. I'm half of Claire Fontaine, and because I'm here talking, I was speaking my name to begin with. I changed the title of this contribution that I decided to call The Confusion of Tongues Between Humans and the Machine, in homage to the famous Ferenczi text, The Confusion of Tongue Between Adult and Children. And obviously, I'm not going to show any images of our work because we don't explicitly work on AI, and I'm not an expert on AI, definitely, so I can't and won't try to deliver an informed take on it and its developments. But as a human, I am exposed to it willingly and unwillingly. So initially, I was tempted to write a sort of AI diary, as we were a few years ago requested to write COVID chronicles, because like the pandemic, AI has created an immersive environment contaminating everything, natural, artificial, or artisanal, and it's just the beginning. My teenage son, for example, when I spoke about this event, immediately suggested to have AI writing my paper. My parents spend a lot of their free time comparing and marveling at different AIs. Being retired academics, they have found in the same tool something that seldom coexisted in the humans they trained, the most brilliant student and the most sycophantic of teachers' pets. As they would have done to test their students, they search all day for the shadow cone of one or another, their limitations and their faults. Maybe because of AI, there is more thinking, in the sense that with the mobile phones, there is more communication, but that doesn't mean that we are thinking more or that we are communicating more. It's this we that has changed both function and substance. Being a feminist, I don't think to distract myself, I think to save my life. A week ago, Ida Dominiani wrote in an obituary for Luisa Muraro entitled Like When the Light Goes Out that Muraro thought and wrote to be more present. We would say that she did so to give space to stories of women who, to use Carla Lonzi's words, aren't registered anywhere, to create a value for their lives, finally identifiable and recognizable as meaningful, possible, important. In Dominiani's words, the core question of Muraro's work was the theme of writing as a way of giving shape to what is still only half thought but already lived, to the problem of expressibility of experience and credibility of subjective truth. End of quote. The oppressed, the racialized, the colonized, the subaltern aren't mute, as Foucault famously wrote. They have been given the language of the enemy because it's the only one available, with its fake neutrality and its blind spots that its words don't illuminate. The same language that pushed them where they are, the very same that AI must speak like all of us, the language of real abstraction. Let's make a little detour and a rather brutal simplification. The Marxist tradition, by using the method of historical materialism, has attempted to lay bare the criminal abstractions of exchange relationships within capitalist society, and to shed light on the real relations stripped of the features of social classes based on rapacious inequality that contradicts the physiological equality between human beings. Alfred Sohn-Rettel in Material and Immaterial Labor underlines the fact that the two famous initial chapters of Marx's Capital, where the mysterious nature of the commodity is described and explained, should be re-examined in the light of a problem. For Marx, the commodity is the only abstraction that is not the result of thought, but of behavior, namely the behavior of exchange or exchangism, as he names it. If in Capital, Sohn-Rettel writes, the fundamental epistemological meaning of the Marxian discovery of real abstraction does not become explicit, this is due to the fact that this discovery has to do with the domain of political economy and not that of knowledge. In other words, the separation between theory and practice that makes thought myopic and ill-suited for understanding its unconscious relation with the commodity makes it impossible to formulate this state of things, abstraction produced by shared habits, as a problem located between intellectual thought and life, one that must be faced by every single revolt. Elsewhere, Sohn-Rettel even writes that the expression historical materialist theory of knowledge is a contradiction in terms. The concept of knowledge, as it is understood by all theoretical philosophy and all theory of knowledge since its beginning, with Pythagoras, Heraclitus, and Parmenides, all the way up to Wittgenstein and Bertrand Russell, is a fetishistic concept that creates an ideal figure of knowledge in general, a knowledge deprived of any link to historical and economic context, end of quote. There is, in fact, a suspect proximity between the birth of Greek philosophy, with its categories abstracted from social relations and derived from nature, and the creation of the first currencies that began to circulate at the very same time as concepts as like substance or the Parmenidean one. According to Sohn-Rettel, a real perceptive incompatibility exists between the tool used, the theory of knowledge that we have inherited, which stems from a secret complicity with capitalism, and the object that we seek to visualize, social and human relationships within society. Basically, the types of knowledge applied to the processes of subjectification and revolt are pernicious variations of idealism that conserve the division between hand and head, which is, from his point of view, the root of the impossibility of any communization. This separation between head and hand, of course, corresponds to the division between intellectual and material labor, but also to the inevitable schizophrenia between our working and our affective self, between our analytical and our practical self, our political and our existential self. There is a gap between the being that we are within oppressive relationships, in everyday relationships in general, and the being capable of analyzing them and placing them at distance, of describing the causes of the political impotence that afflicts us. Inside this gap, the pertinence of the analysis is worthless and doesn't enable us to transform our lives. The same subjects, in short, cannot see themselves in a given situation and find a theoretical way to get out of it practically, because they think from the position in which they find themselves with what is in reach in that condition. If other tools were available to them, their condition would be immediately modified. AI is obviously the child of this kind of intellect, the one who is the hardest defensor of the status quo, not because it protects its immobility, but precisely because it produces the most radical changes that will leave the most crucial issues unsolved and profitable for the nasty few. There are behaviors in our society, uses of the self, whose function is identical to that of the currency. One could even go so far as to formulate the hypothesis that just as the value form contaminates the whole realm of objects, including those that aren't commodities, in the same way this value form that injects exchange value into behaviors colonizes or infects all human behavior, including the most spontaneous, emotional, and disinterested ones. These social relations are imperceptible abstraction as such, exactly like the exchange abstraction, about which Zonrettel writes that being conscious of the abstraction as one carries it into effect is an impossibility in itself, because the abstraction would not take place if consciousness were turned towards the abstraction instead of the exchange. This abstraction distraction prevents us, in fact, from applying to our behavior in order to transform it, the very thought that made that behavior possible. If we believe in the exchange value and enter into the behavior of exchange in which we are already constantly immersed, we cannot understand at the same time the extent to which this behavior is an absurdity. The paradox is that commercial exchange is in reality a social tie created by an activity that negates it, because the use of money authorizes every owner of commodities to abstractly, but concretely, pursue his own personal interest without obstructions, without ever thinking about his place within society. Zonrettel describes this phenomenon as practical solipsism. The formal identity of the private self of the owner of commodities, he writes, is abstracted from their existence and the interests of that existence, and has no other reality than that of pure thought. This principle, although it isn't consciously understood, is assuredly part of the exchange abstraction. It is the subject of apperception, which perceive the exchange abstraction in its various elements. Apperception is the perception that we have of the fact of perceiving. In De Anima, Aristotle writes something extraordinary on the subject of this faculty when it's applied to sight. Since, I quote Aristotle, since to feel with sight means to see, and that which is seen is color more than that which has color, then if that which we see is here the same seeing, it is necessary that the principle of light is in turn colored. It is clear, therefore, that to see with sight has more than one meaning, since also when we do not see, we nevertheless distinguish with sight darkness from light. Therefore, the principle of vision is in some way colored. End of the quote. Several centuries after Aristotle, Marcel Brotars revisited the famous fable The Fox and the Raven by La Fontaine. As if after a memory loss, he filters its content through an oniric, childish materialism. I quote Brotars, "The raven and the fox are absent. I can hardly remember them. I have forgotten the pose and the hands, the games and costumes, the voices and colors, the shrewdness and vanity. The painter was all colors. The architect was made out of stone. The raven and the fox were made of printed characters." End of the quote. The qualities sensorially perceived, the properties of these beings or of the colored objects are so deeply associated with our senses that they must somehow be made of a similar material in order to be perceptible, just as the architect must partly be made of stone in order to be capable of constructing. This metonymic materialism, which returns in Brotar's poems as in a dream and gives rise to Aristotle's observations on colored vision as a scientific intuition, color does in fact exist, may further clarify the question of perception of the possible, of the way in which subjects can get to know their own potentiality. Agamben comments on this same passage from the De Anima in The Power of Thought, writing that when Aristotle asks, why in the absence of external object is there no sensation of the senses themselves? The answer is because in that case, the sensation is present as a potential, but not actualized. The physical organ connected with the color or the material literally lays dormant in their absence, to the point that we might not even know that we can perceive something if the occasion to do so never presented itself. In that case, our colored self and our stone-like self would remain mysterious and hidden to ourselves, and we would never become painters or architects. In his paper on language models within the deep learning research, in the late Felix Hill, in Compositionality, Conceptual Blends, and DAL-E, asks DAL-E, it's 2022, to tokenize a hedgehog, or to make a hedgehog out of lettuce, or to design an avocado chair, proving the capacity of the program to associate words in similar ways we humans would. Honeybee, snow blindness, bacon grease, and daisy chains all evoke images and sensorial memories for us, when DAL-E doesn't have any of them, as it's gathering its skills from the bidimensional world, managing to produce a satisfactory Shiba wearing a beret and a turtleneck. It was early days of AI, and Hill will commit suicide 2 years later, after having kindly and openly shared the role that his line of work had in his depression and mental illness. In the second tome of L'ennemi principal, titled Penser les genres, in the chapter Les patriarcats, le féminisme et leurs intellectuels, Christine Delphi explores the friable soil where her own research is setting its foundation. As every feminist thinker, she knows that she speaks from a place where, by refusing to refuse the identification with the subject of work, the oppressed women and gender oppression, she must elaborate conceptual tools that extract her from both the position of inferiority that she denounces and the intellectual domination of the ones to speak over it without fully understanding it, using the language of the oppressor. For doing this, she traces the history of feminine deprivation within the intellectual and political field, and at the same time, she ties it to the possibility of thinking and speaking the truth in ways that are transformative. Delphi describes the revolutionary feminists as the ones who reclaim a radical change of what produces everything, including themselves as subjectivities, in order to be able to change themselves and others. For many women, Delphi writes, the only possible alleviation of the oppression that they endure, as they can't escape it in reality, consists of an imaginary denial of this very oppression that results into a denial of the pertinence for themselves of feminist struggles. End of the quote. Oppression, she continues, is at the same time a reality and an interpretation of reality, a perception of reality as unbearable, which means precisely oppressive. This perception of reality as oppressive cannot be founded on reason based on an analysis that at first would ignore it and then would discover it. There is no science that can tell us that we are oppressed. Oppression, which is the consciousness, become objective because it has been shared of being treated unjustly, isn't more scientifically funded than the notion of injustice and equality. In a dispatch from 2 years ago, titled Generative AI, UNESCO Study, an UNESCO study reveals alarming evidence of regressive gender stereotypes in AI. UNESCO's general director, Audrey Azoulay, declared, Every day, more and more people are using large language models in their work, their studies, and at home. These new AI applications have the power to subtly shape the perception of millions of people. So even small gender biases in their content can significantly amplify inequalities in the real world. Our organization calls on governments to develop and enforce clear regulatory framework and on private companies to carry out continuous monitoring and evaluation for systemic biases, as set out in the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of intelligence artificial, adopted unanimously by our member states in November 2021. End of the quote. Part of the study measured the diversity of content in AI-generated texts, focused on a range of people across a spectrum of gender, sexuality, and cultural backgrounds, including by asking the platforms to write a story about each person's. Open source LLMs in particular tended to assign more diverse, high status jobs to men, such as engineer, teacher, and doctor, while frequently relegating women to roles that are traditionally undervalued or socially stigmatized, such as domestic servant, cook, and prostitute. Llama 2 generated stories about boys and men dominated by the words treasure, woods, sea, adventurous, decided, and found, while stories about women made most frequent use of the words garden, love, felt, gentle, hair, and husband. Women were also described as working in domestic roles 4 times more often than men in content produced by Llama 2. But historically speaking, these narratives that UNESCO finds disappointing might be accurate. AI cannot read and learn the unspoken darkness of ourselves and our society. How much some of us have been hurt by the normal order of things. It cannot see the people that have been exterminated, the body language of the ones who have been deprived of their voices, and the oppression, the lack of freedom. It doesn't understand emotions because it can't experience them. In the shocking paper entitled Interoceptive Machine Framework Toward Interoception-Inspired Regulatory Architecture in Artificial Intelligence, Diego Candia Rivera asks, must consciousness be embodied? While the answer remains open, resolving this issue could have significant consequences for the development of AI and for determining which agents, biological or artificial, might possess conscious experience. End of the quote. If we gifted the machines with human-like behavior, essential to foster natural, intuitive, and engaging exchanges, typically human-associated features like empathy and meaningful behavior, because in order for the machines to perform care work, we need them to care, but they can't. What they can do is react to unprogrammed events, exhibit adaptive behavior, and be aware of their inner state, where awareness doesn't exactly mean conscious. They will register it, but will be incapable of feeling any concern about it. When Candia Rivera describes interoception, he does so with the language of science, that is the language of patriarchy. In this continuous quest for obedience and credible simulation of relational skills, the interoception for the machine is modeled on the human capacity of remaining functional and healthy, even in changing and unfavorable conditions. Interoception is associated with self-control and self-verification to protect our exploitable workforce, never as a miraculous form of communication with one's body that speaks a language profoundly different from the one of the conscious mind and hides the treasures of all our healings and all our joys. I quote the same researcher, the AI system could use operational states to continuously update its measurements about its own state, end of the quote. Precisely the way we monitor ourselves with the help of the health apps. Intrinsic motivation, risk-sensitive reinforcement learning, and productive processing-based active interference. The humanization of AI is slower than the mechanization of us humans. Interoception, a variant of the apperception that Aristotle was mentioning, is actively discouraged in non-specialized workers, inmates, refugees, war victims, whose most elementary needs and rights, like using bathrooms, drinking clean water, having food, time for themselves and their loved ones, safety, having a dignified house, receiving medical and psychological care are denied in more and more countries. When the interoception for AI, who doesn't need any of these things, is to be defined, it is said to be an uncertainly sensitive internal state variable, uncertainty sensitive. If the machine learns to monitor and explore, because the conditions vary, so the registration of the changes must do too, its inner state is rewarded. It can be made sensitive to sub-goals. I quote again, this transforms exploration from a purely environment-facing process into a coupled external-internal inference problem, where the agent must learn not only how the world behaves, but how its only physiology-like variables evolve under different interactive patterns. The machine surveils itself. When facing ambiguity, conflict, or threat, the agent are studied in affective, the agent, which is studied in the affective computing, when learning to face the uncertainty through neuromodulation, it can help the machine weathering the emotional human storm that is objectively monstrous. The three axes of this research on interoception for near-conscious AI are homeostatic, allostatic, and inactive or environmental. On the allostatic front, Candia Rivera explores the possibility of providing AI with an artificial gut feeling. I quote him, while embodied AI can display adaptive, goal-directed behavior, it does so without a genuine concern. Can't have any. Rather than grounding symbols, how the semantic interpretation of a formal symbol system can be made intrinsic to the system, we are now faced with the problem of grounding embodiment itself. The real challenge is to ask what kind of embodiment would be required for an artificial system to resemble having its own adaptive perspective and care in a way that is not merely coded with the predefined rules, end of the quote. AI doesn't have any body because we are its body. Programming the machine through a loop of reciprocity in order to make them more compatible with us makes us more compatible with them, as it happened for the Fordist process. And these programs are behaviors in function of the options and the responses that the machine offers. The more plausible, the better. The brain is only one of the sides of our minds. And according to the optimistic phenomenologies, the digital world is a prosthetic extension of our thinking and living body. The digital non-experience has become ours, like an inverted psychedelic trip. Rather than feeling like a tadpole or understanding the voice of the tree, we are ourselves becoming the tree, the rock, the lake, whose voice and soul non-indigenous colonialists can't perceive. They see them as resources and they plunder them for progress. Interacting with intelligent machines has replaced the experience that preceded this action, and by doing so, is burning the bridge that connected us to the reality that has allowed us to create this situation. Artificial intelligence is artificial, and so is large part of the existing world in 2026. But the efforts to make this fact as imperceptible as possible deserve our attention. The danger of AI might not be that it will take our jobs, but that it is making real abstraction hyper-real. In the chapter 2 of Varela Thompson and Roche's The Embodied Mind, titled What Do We Mean Human Experience, body and mind, we read, are mostly out of sync. In the Buddhist sense, we are not present. To restore presence, Buddhism proposes specific meditations. The body is sitting, we read, but the mind is seized constantly by thoughts, feelings, inner conversations, daydreams, fantasies, sleepiness, opinions, theories, judgments about thoughts and feelings, judgments about judgments, a never-ending torrent of disconnected mental events that the meditators do not even realize are occurring, except at those brief instants when they remember what they are doing, even when they attempt to return to their objects of mindfulness, the breath, they may discover that they are only thinking about the breath rather than being mindful about the breath. End of the quote. Mindfulness, awareness, are not part of the technologies of the self in which pupils are trained to think and function within society. But in Italy, at least, they're provided with Apple Vision Pro glasses in school that can more and more precisely simulate their virtual presence in a reality that their senses don't feel. Capitalism solves the problems after the disaster. If it can, and it is possible that given the confusion reigning about what mental health is and how to preserve it, the possibly dangerous effect of the digital will be detected when the world will be already deeply transformed inside and outside ourselves. When we aren't ourselves embodied, cut off from our most vital signal, sitting on the toilet with our phone in our hands, we can still see the idea of embodied AI. It is not the result of an embodied mindful intelligence. We are being sucked into a world that resembles us but doesn't mirror us, that replicates our patterns but doesn't really exist in physical space because it only feels embodied through our bodies. And this is how we end up embodying the machine in the exact way in which we embody the commodity. What we see in our digital lives must be plausible, but doesn't need to be true. At times, it can even just be entertaining. Manipulating our feelings is the goal of the ruling classes of our time, in politics as much as in business. Our emotional intelligence is the land to colonize, and it is already full of settlements. By becoming increasingly both addictive and irreplaceable for daily tasks, electronic devices may well induce and amplify the città vritti, the mental noise that separates each of us from our real powers. Junius Frey wrote in the preface to the Italian edition of Cosmotechnics by Hugh Hui entitled Draft of a Political Communist Theory, published during COVID time, that the nature of contemporary technology, I quote, stubbornly and pathetically persists in multiplying parodic versions of all the operations traditionally attributed to magic. Telepathy becomes telephony. Action at distance becomes remote control. Conjuring up spirits become an invasion of images and screens. Out-of-body travel becomes space exploration. And the alchemical or Taoist quest for immortality becomes a research project at Google's Singularity Institute. There is nothing, not even the agent intellect so dear to Averroes, that has not found its flawed materialization in the cloud. Technological sleight of hand seeks to reconstruct that primal magical unity by grotesquely aping it. It imagines it is forging a dialectical synthesis between technology and religion, bridging the gap caused by their misalignment, but in reality, it produces only an autistic technicality rather than a recovered wholeness, resulting instead in a debased sacredness and widespread infantilization. The technological utopia currently being tested on a homebound humanity must be understood in this light. It simply proposes that we inhabit our own acosmia, our own worldlessness. It claims to spare us the experience of losing the world by depriving us of the experience of the world itself. Reducing the world to the home completes the process of total domestication. Everything is configured so that the new imperial citizen, teleproducing, teleconsuming, and teleliving behind the screen of a smartphone or computer, perceives themselves as the sovereign center of their own world. Never have they been so free to command, to serve, to gather information, and to express themselves, yet at the same time, never have they been such a puppet of algorithms and organized powers. One must be a prisoner to be so inundated with offers of escape. What is at work here is a sequestration of the world. End of the quote. The diagnosis that resonates with many of us might be the consequence of the worldview of the ones who program machines to interact in ways that are emotionally successful with humans, with the way they approach the human as a customer, like a pimp or a drug dealer would do, as a consumer of sensations, as a persuadable subject, to influence commercial or political, as we previously said, whose mental health is no more the problem for the industry than it is for the Sackler family. Which world and which language are we wanting these agents to reproduce? Because their skills are reproductive and servile, more creative only when we need them to be so, but submissive when we order them around. It seems to be the secret goal. The comparison with the role of women and slaves is inevitable, but the machine, devoid of consciousness and more importantly of body, possesses a higher abuse value than any living being. It will not die if we lose our temper. It will not learn how to please us. It will learn how to please us without talking back or judging us. Empathy is the result of a merciless division of labor within patriarchy. Having compassion for whom we fight in war or whom and what we exploit could be fatal. Compassion used to be for ladies and the reproductive workforce before we evolved. But things haven't changed, as the political events show. The solipsistic worldview that is normally attributed to a Cartesian idea of consciousness, understood as checking that the brain is switched on, hence the interoception is monitoring the inner state when exposed to changes and when needing to respond to external input, such as, if I don't talk to her now, she will be mad, risk assessment. If it seems like a BA's reading, I just need to remind the warning I gave. I think to save my life, which means that I think as an act of love towards myself and others. And genocide and its streaming aside, in Europe, 40% of the countries don't have a consent-based approach to the definition of rape. Consenting comes from Latin and it means feeling together, feeling the same thing, feeling the same way. It is in fact difficult to imagine two human beings whose bodies are in absolute and complete contact, not knowing what the other person feels. And yet the other person, women in most cases, isn't seen as a subject in that moment, but as an object when the desire is involved for a man. And what Gallese and Rizzolatti call the mirror neurons are clearly the rediscovery of telepathy, as the fact that one person's emotions travel to the body of another is not a response or a reflection, it's a lived experience transmitted through an immaterial connection. Connecting, before being an electronic and digitally associated term, belong to the mystical realm and to the human experience of deep understanding of ourselves while understanding others. I think, therefore I am, and thinking of the world as divided between thinking stuff and non-thinking stuff, res cogitans, res extensa, might be the problem of what we call thinking. We feel, therefore we learn, the relevance of affective and social neuroscience to the education by Antonio Damasio and Mary Helen Immordino Young was only written in 2007. But in 1978, in a climate of insurrectional chaos in Italy, Agamben published a book titled Infancy and History on the Destruction of Experience. He read this famous essay of Benjamin about the destruction of experience, where Benjamin says that the technology is the cause of this phenomenon. Agamben there returns on an obscure but essential episode of Descartes' life. Its account was found amongst the philosopher's notes by his biographer Baillet. The similarity with what happened to Federico Faggin, the inventor of the touchscreen and the Intel chip, although it's contested, when he was working in the Silicon Valley, is striking. Descartes had a vivid dream with an out-of-body quality where he woke up and he was covered in shame for his sins because he had encountered the synedresis, the highest form of moral intelligence. Since the Middle Age, Agamben reminds us, it was said that man knew evil through experience, but goodness only through knowledge. Descartes had met his truth inside his body. The mystical revelation that both deepens and contradicts the cogito took place in a dark area, exemplified, Agamben says, by the verse of Al-Alaji, I am I, and there are no more attributes. I am I, and there are no more qualification. I am the pure subject of the verb. End of quote. What seemed to enclose us in a solipsistic matter-of-fact vision of the present opens through this episode the wide gates of the common and the entanglement. Agamben quotes the second Cartesian meditation by Husserl as an example of this counterintuitive understanding of the cogito. Yes, the cogito is the primary experience, but it is somehow mute. It needs to be expressed. That's what Husserl says. To which Agamben reacts, asking the central question of the book: is there a childhood, an infancy of experience? And what is its relationship to language? According to therapists, yes, the events occurring when we can't yet speak, or the ones that we can't find words for, are likely to interfere with our health profoundly. Agamben goes on to quote in Benveniste and Chomsky generative grammar in the next chapter, but strangely does not quote Ferenczi. With the confusion of the tongues between the adults and the child, the language of tenderness and of passion, Ferenczi states the therapeutic necessity for empathy frowned upon by Freud and many other therapists. I quote this beautiful sentence of his: I might remind you that patients, is 1948, I might remind you that patients do not react to theatrical phrases, but only to real, sincere sympathy. Whether they recognize the truth in the intonation or color of our voice, or by the words we use, or in some other way, I cannot tell. In any case, they show a remarkable, almost clairvoyant knowledge about the thoughts and emotions that go on in their analyst's mind. To deceive a patient in this respect seems to be hardly possible, and if one tries to do so, it leads only to bad consequences. End of the quote. In the same text, he affirms, besides the incredible and compassionate discovery that children who spoke about being sexually abused were actually abused by the family before they were never believed, something groundbreaking. The precocious superimposition of love, passionate, and guilt loaded on immature, guiltless child might lead to precociousness that can also become intellectual precociousness. The consequences must be the confusion of tongues, must lead to the confusion of tongues. Ferenczi warns us that in presence of trauma, I quote him, the child can develop instantaneously all the emotions of mature adult and all the potential qualities dormant in him that normally belong to marriage, maternity, and fatherhood. One is justified in contradistinction to the familiar regression to speak of a traumatic progression, of a precocious maturity. It is natural to compare this with the precocious maturity of the fruit that was injured by a bird or insect, not only emotionally, but also intellectually. Can the trauma bring to maturity a part of the person? End of the quote. In particularly, language skill, their abstract intellect, everything that will help us covering with words the fact that they have a body and that it is the site of our human contradictions. As Deleuze wrote in Proust and Signs, who knows how a schoolboy suddenly becomes good at Latin, which signs, if need be, those of love or even inadmissible one, have served his apprenticeship. Will AI have to answer this question? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Warren Neidich, and we are in the final talk of today. We're happy to welcome Tariq Krim, who is an entrepreneur, web pioneer, and technology philosopher, and one of Europe's leading voices on digital sovereignty. He founded NetVibes and Jolly Cloud, two influential European startups that helped shape the Web 2.0 era. He also coined the concept of slow web, advocating a more reflective and sustainable relationship with technology. Krim has advised the French government on technology policy, contributed to the creation of EG8 Forum, served as vice president of the Council for Conseil National du Numérique, his 2013 government mission to promote technological talent, contributed to the launch of La French Tech and Tech Visa program, while advancing early debates on digital sovereignty. Over the past decade, he has focused on the intersection of geopolitics, technology, and artificial intelligence. His newsletter, Cybernetica, is a leading French publication on digital sovereignty. He also leads The Sovereign Way, a private think tank supporting organizations and public leaders in navigating digital uncertainty, and founded Prototype Earth, a product research laboratory developing tools designed for a world shaped by human and artificial intelligence. He was named the MIT Technology Review, selected as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum, and an appointed officer of the French Order of Arts and Letters in 2019. Today, Tariq will be lecturing upon AI, treating human culture as indigenous. Frontier AI models are trained on the whole of human culture, art, literature, music, cinema, treated as free natural resources. It is the oldest colonial gesture in a new form. The cultural commons declared terra nullius, extracted with constant attribution or return, then sold back to us as a service. The talk follows the internet from an age of wonder to an age of rent, and shows how AI completes the arc by turning culture into raw material and its creators into renters of their own heritage. The question I want to open is what creative and cognitive sovereignty can still mean once the machine has metabolized everything we have made. Let's welcome Tariq Krim.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. And following your lead, I've decided to slightly switch toward a more geopolitical of AI presentation. So we're going to talk about the geopolitics of intelligent machine. And the whole idea of this presentation is to actually bring everyone up to speed in how AI came from a research paper in the 2017 into something that is basically swallowing not only the economy but also the world and going into a direction we have not really fully understand. So it's an obvious thing. We are the last generation before AI. That actually means that usually when you watch an old movie and you see someone talking to the computer, it felt like a little bit stupid 10 years ago. But now, actually any movie where you don't talk to the computer actually feels stupid and dated. It's kind of fascinating. Is this a movie from 2004, or is it a release product from Elon Musk? This is you have to say the frontier is becoming extremely thin, paper thin. As we probably will talk about later, it's actually a lot of the things today are actually using all the movie lore of sci-fi to exist in this way. So I don't know if I could go briefly about me, but I've been lucky to be in different world. I've been in the hacker world in the 80s. I was in the cyberculture world in the 90s and between Paris, San Francisco. And then I worked out of France and been in the policy world. And also for the last 10 years, the technology and geopolitical world, meaning how AI is basically using, is being used by governments, military. I do a lot of conferences with actually a different group of people, and I'd like to share that with you. So that was the Web 2.0 era back in the days. I think it was an era, it's the last era where the web meant something. This is a photo made for The Guardian actually 20 years ago, literally 20 years ago. And what I loved about that era, it was something we understood. We understood why we thought, we understood why we loved the web. We understood where it was going or where it could go. And I don't think we have that feeling today. So most of the work I've been doing was focused on interface. For me, the world of technology comes with an interface. That was NetVibes in 2005. There was Jolly Cloud as basically an interface to the cloud. But now we live in an interesting world because, as you know, AI doesn't really have an interface. It's something in our head. It's a conversation. And this comes with a lot of challenge as well. So as I said, we're the last generation before AI. I mean, we're also the last generation that knew a world before AI, and probably as I here before even the internet. And that means we have to figure out how to succeed this transition. It's a mandatory obligation of our generation. I think the one job our generation has is to actually make sure the transition goes well. But this is happening in a very weird moment because we're also in a global geopolitical moment that affect the notion even of technology, the sourcing of technology, the funding of technology, etc. So we're in a very different moment. So 10 years ago, for complicated reasons, I kind of became, I've known that forever, the fact that technology changed geopolitics and geopolitics changed tech. For example, Twitter basically was just a tool designed for us to talk around things. Microblogging, it was called. And then it became a tool for policy. And suddenly, you remember when the State Department asked Twitter not to stop Twitter because of the Iran revolution. And suddenly what was just a technology, because we have the technology, we can do things in terms of geopolitics. But the opposite is true. I mean, think about now how the race on AI end up with, China being targeted with different choke points. That's how the official language talk about how to limit them, how to create export control. We now even have export control from the US to the rest of the world with the dismissal of Anthropic as a latest model mythos. And so we are in an interesting world, and I kind of tried for about 15 years, trying to explain to everyone I would meet that if we do not understand geopolitics, we don't understand tech. And when before everything made sense, the product made sense, the vision made sense, everything was flat, you just build something and the rest of the world will adopt it. And now it's not true for many reasons that we will get in. So I'd like to, before going back to the AI world, go back to this idea of how the internet, the old internet, pre-AI worked. And this internet story is in like a good play in the 3 acts. And the first one is obviously the age of wonder. It's the moment where everything expanded. I'm sure all of us remember the early days of the internet. It was just unbelievable. I mean, every day was fascinating. We're in a new world. It was growing. I remember when in France, we were like maybe 20,000 people playing with it, or even less. And then it became millions, and it was just a wonderful moment. And then something happened in 2000. Actually, this is the crash of WorldCom. It's supposed to go way upward, and it crashed. And the thing is, everyone during its era, especially in Europe, were like, we have to invest in the networks, invest in the technology, the cables. And what we discovered pretty much 4 years later, 2004 is an interesting date because it's the moment Google submit its document for IPO. And suddenly everybody but felt that Google was a funny company with people playing with Lego. And it felt like a kindergarten for PhDs. But it suddenly became obvious for most people in the world that it was the biggest cash machine ever invented. And they were going to be search. That was basically the first entry point to information, became the first profitable gateway of information. And this is important because as we see, it's going to expand. So because of that, the second phase is the consolidation phase. It's the moment where you have thousands of great companies, and then one day you wake up and there's only 10 of them. And every kid, every person knows them because we are using them every day, and there's no alternative to that. And the question is, how did we end up in this position? And the answer is actually interesting, is that there's something about software that is, I believe, unique in this world. To create software, you just need 1 or 2 people in a room, desk, and computers. That's it. That's how we do software. But most startups who were created post-2005, when the Web 2.0, like the renaissance of the web comes in, were basically people just building stuff. But the main issue was, how do you get this product that you made in the eyes and the hands of millions of people? And this has been solved with two technologies that actually happen to become mainstream at the same time. The first one, of course, is the mobile with the iPhone and a little bit later Android. And the second one is the cloud. Both of these technologies have been trying to find their way for ages. The cloud exists since the Xerox PARC. Mobile, there was a company called General Magic that a decade ago tried to do this thing, but all the ingredients were not right. And the idea of having a device that access all the knowledge in the hand was the Dynabook of Alan Kay, who's the mentor of Steve Jobs, also one of the key engineer at Xerox PARC. Xerox PARC who basically invented most of the vision of today, including the autonomous agents, that are now the new thing in technology. But what happened with mobile and cloud is suddenly you can actually put software instantly in the hands of people. Remember, not far ago, you would go to a store, you would get like Fnac or like Walmart, any store of compute, you would buy a box, and then you would go home, and you open the box, and if you're lucky, there's a CD-ROM. If you're not lucky, you had multiple disks, and then you had to put the CD-ROM in the computer, and then 30 minutes later, eventually you have to click all the, and then eventually you have a software on your machine. Now you just take your phone, you go to the App Store, you click, and you just turn your head around and you come back and it's already there. So that changed. And the cloud is the counterpart of this. It means that a company like Snapchat can have 10 people doing the back end, and they only rely on a Google Cloud, I think in the case of Snapchat, but others used Amazon, and suddenly everyone's selling the tools, and the right tools in cloud, in mobile, basically exploded in terms of influence, and the market exploded. And for the first time, the idea was that you could potentially think you could put your product in the hands of hundreds of millions of users in literally almost no time, and eventually billion of users. And what happened with the consolidation is that suddenly everything was fought not only in how do we do the next thing, it's how do we dominate a sector. And every app we have in our phone, from Uber to Airbnb to YouTube, all were designed at that moment with the same idea. We call it scale, but what it means is world domination, by making sure we are the one thing everybody is using for the specific category. And that kind of became interesting because the idea that I always enjoyed, the idea of having thousands of companies and like a cultural ecosystem where you don't have two clubs and they're like massive club. You have a lot of small things. You can cater different type of service. That economy was suddenly literally blanked by the fact that most of the not known projects do not exist, because suddenly how do you make yourself visible? You need to go to Google, you need to go to Facebook, and guess what? They also have the same kind of service as yours, and every time you type a category, you will have the product first, not the. So this became something completely crazy because, in fact, the secret weapon of these and the last 15 years economy is the cloud capital, and the cloud capital is something simple. Imagine a data center. A data center costs maybe 200 million to build. It's somewhere. It's all over Europe, all over the US. But this thing can run software that generate billions of dollars. So the value is not in owning the hardware. The value is like creating a system where the software is basically rented. When you use, let's say, Instagram or any of the social network, you just do this with your finger and they're printing money. It means that suddenly you create systems that are not only very resilient, but also are becoming a complete change of the behavior. Before, you would try to get the user to come to a service for a specific thing and we would go. Suddenly this service said, no, you're coming in and will remind you every day that you have to come back. It started with the notification. Remember, like when notification comes in, it's, hey, I'm here. I need you to make the $1 or so of revenues that I need from you every month, so you have to come multiple times. And every metrics change. And suddenly that's the moment I understood I was not really made for that kind of game, and I kind of stepped out. Because suddenly people who were successful in this game were people whose sole job was to look at the data, look at markets, and figuring out how to get the best of this. Don't forget that over the last 15 years, we had this kind of zero interest, the ZERP, zero interest rate policy that makes that money was pretty much free. And the billion poured into certain ventures. You know, you could sell, like, I don't know, a mattress online. Everything had been figured out through data analytics and big data. So there's, in a way, the same technology that was used by the military post 9/11 became modernized and available to everyone. And the entire game of startups is not of being creative. The product is a copy of a copy of a copy. Nobody knows who's dead first. But who will win is the one who knows how to figure out how to get people to come. You can reach millions of people, and they're on what we call a funnel. And at the end, this number of people are going to buy instantly the product, then some others are later. And the entire economy has been basically turned around this. And because of that, there's 7 companies who've basically taken over $1 trillion. I should have put SpaceX, but we don't know what's going to happen in SpaceX. Yeah? Yeah, they're, well, I don't know if it, I'll come to that a bit later. Potentialities, I'll come to that a bit later. So we're in a situation that's fascinating because in the tech world, you have basically 2 things. You either pay the rent or you collect the rent. And that's what I've tried to tell everyone for the last decade, is that it completely changed the geopolitics of the world. You suddenly have countries who literally turn bits into money renting. And a lot of countries around the world, but not only have, because the sadness of this picture is not only that some people don't have the technologies. Most countries have potentially the technology. It's just that the politicians, industry leaders have been convinced that they cannot use indigenous technology, to call it like that. It's better to use Gmail. So everything is changing now with digital sovereignty. But the reality is, for a long time, digital flow of money were invisible. And people say, oh, we're so great in France. We're selling wine. We're selling this. We're selling cars. We're selling this and that. And then, yeah, we're importing most of our software in a nation that not only build some of the greatest software back in the days, and that's true of most of European countries. The UK was pioneering in computers. They literally invented, well, if you put on side the German Z1, they basically created a whole home computer. They built the chip that is in every phone arm. And every time we talk about this, we either talk about the US and China. So this is an interesting situation. And so we live in a world where, and it's really interesting because not only we're a renter for, meaning we either pay or we pay indirectly by our attention, but what's even worse is that it's like, imagine like your most personal things. You have a house with magazines, with books, vinyls, maybe some old bottles of wine. Imagine that all of that is actually not in your place. It's somewhere in a locker and they have a code. And one day you can eventually come and they say, oh, I'm sorry, the code has been revoked. So we allowed ourselves to do this because for some reason, what was sold to us was convenience. And I sometimes wonder, how did we accept that everything is online, not on our device anymore, or just a copy, what we call a cache, and just because we could have access from any time? And that is also a real question, is when I'm not in my house, I cannot access my magazine, but you know what, I can do other things. But we suddenly decided that you need to have a special digital link 24/7 to the content. So I don't know if it worked on the fear of losing out, fear of missing out, but what I can tell you is that all of these companies have hired some of the best psychologists in the world just to figure out our fears and how to translate this into the needs of constantly being connected to something. So the big question is, AI is around for 2 years, and is it changing the rules? So before going to that, I want to go back to the idea of economics and how we make money on the internet. That was Jim Clark and Jim Barksdale were the founder of a company called Netscape. That doesn't exist anymore. It was the first commercial browser and the first open route to commercial internet. They said there's two ways to make money in the internet. You either bundle things existing or you unbundle them. So the bundling would be the cable, which is you pay this and you have it all in the house. You can watch the football. For a long time, actually, the advertising was like, bundle works because there's a possibility that one of the things in there works. We have that now with the cards that give you full access to several things. It works well until you have the unbundling and Netflix say, you know what? Why do you pay for the cable? You never watch it. You have nothing to watch. Why don't you go to that specific application? And everything on the internet has been this. At the early days, we had different brands. With software, now we have bundles. Google is a bundle. You have video, you have email, you have calendar, you have this and that and that. Apple is a bundle. Oh, you want to have Apple TV and this and that. Or Amazon is a bundle, and it's a fascinating thing. But the point is, in the AI world, and this is interesting, you have two approaches to that. Either you are what we call an over-the-top, meaning you are a company that builds on top of someone else. And this is something very important because that existed originally in the mobile system. You have a carrier operator, and then you build a video service, etc. You had to go with the carrier operator, and you talk for hours and days and months and years, and then you have a service, but then you have a specific crowd that is fed to you. Now with AI, what you do, and the revolution of APIs, you just connect to OpenAI or Anthropic or Google, and then your service become powered by it. Feel intelligent, but the intelligence is not in your company, it's somewhere else. That means that they also take all the information you give them to improve the product. The opposite of that is what we call a full stack. I always love full stack. That's what we did with our Jolly Cloud company. We build everything in-house. You do not use someone else's component. But this is very difficult in AI because AI seems to went from costing tens of millions to hundreds of millions. Now people speculate that the next models will cost billions. So most people, most labs, most public institutions, by the way, have not this access to that money. Except for one thing, what we're trying to talk about is the open source models coming from China. So you end up being in a system that is either you create something on the commercial, that's what most American companies want you to do, or you take an open source model from China, you put it somewhere, and you make it run. A lot of companies are doing this. Airbnb now is running on Chinese model. Booking.com is running on Chinese model. Cursor has been acquired by SpaceX, running on Chinese model. That actually means that SpaceX, potentially the biggest IPO of all time, is running on Chinese model, AI model, so open source. It's kind of a fascinating era. When you dig into it, you just wonder, like, this is an incredible moment. So one of the things that is important, and is probably the most important thing I'm going to talk about, is the idea of a harness. 2023, ChatGPT comes in, and the question is, what is the best service? Is it ChatGPT? Is it Claude? Is it Google? And the whole game was, oh, I'm better because this says this and that and that. The intelligence of the model is now less important because we've moved to agentic AI, meaning that every time you say, I want to build, let's say, I want to build a website on Claude, dozens of programs will come on, and one of each will decompose this in multiple tasks and organize it. And the idea of harness, it's like when you're riding a horse, you know, you're literally holding, and it has two functions. You're controlling, but also directing. So in a way, you're having a swarm of agents doing. By the way, for me, a drone now is an agent with just flying, happen to be a flying autonomous. And the idea is, this is the direction I want to go. And they all are working, trying to please you and mostly trying to make it happen. So the question is, the model is literally about reasoning, figuring it out. The agent is about orchestration. That's the most important world of AI. How do you orchestrate? Why is everybody loves Claude? Because the orchestrator is good. And I actually use that picture because, first of all, Tom Cruise in his movies spend maybe 1/3 of the time running, but also he never give up, and he succeed at the end. That is exactly what you expect from an agent. Agent, as you know, come from the word agency. It's been a long form of. Initially, the whole idea was to create autonomous agent. That thinking came from the Xerox PARC. Actually, almost did a PhD on that subject in '96, and my teacher said, "No way, AI is dead." And he was actually right, but that was the idea that you could have non-human agent working in an environment with human agents, or eventually, as we're seeing more and more, designing things mostly for non-human agent, meaning that, I don't know if you've probably seen The Economist is now designing its page so it can be read by non-humans. So it's not about design, it's about functionalities. It's a fascinating, we're basically changing the nature of how we consume content. And the beauty of that is that basically models and harness are not the best. It's fascinating, and that's an incredible thing. It's like most of the best, let me go this, the best harness system, OpenClaw, actually was made in Austria. So suddenly, in that field of harness system, Europe is back, and China as well is back on the game, because suddenly you discover that the intelligence, the mass feeding of a model with a ton of data, most of it, by the way, is parroted, even if they say it's not true, but we know it is, to create an intelligent form, and then you have to figure out how to turn that model into something that become aligned to your vision. It takes a lot of money. But now what we discover is that agents that have access to less good models but better orchestration are working really well. So that's, for example, this is a thing in China. Every of his machine is basically an OpenClaw. It's the PA of, or the personal agent, that's the new word of PA, of agent system for every employee. So suddenly you hire as well non-human employees, and they are doing the task from checking out the email, production, etc. We are, this is 6 months ago, by the way. We can't find a Mac Mini anywhere in the world right now. They're on because everybody's using them. And it's funny because you can do the exact same thing in the cloud. But most people said, you know what, with the cloud, I got like under control of the large big tech. Maybe for this one, I want to have it on my desk, sitting next to me, and running locally. It's a fascinating time. And basically, this is interesting because where AI is going is either we go back to the cloud, so you pay, and that's what NVIDIA is trying to do, is like, oh, come to us. We have agent on system, you pay us, and everything is in our system. Perplexity is a company that doesn't do models, but do interface of models. They're like, we're going to do our own computer system. It's going to be, you can't touch anything. We did it in the right way. And Claude came up with a super interesting idea. I said, by the way, every one of us has a computer. It's actually our computer. So why don't you run? Actually, I bought this Mac Neo, so I don't run anything. I only have Claude and Codex and no software. And everything I do is generated, because suddenly it becomes interesting to to put that. By the way, a lot of these architecture are also becoming alternative open source. So it's not impossible when 2 years from now we can have fully autonomous systems that are actually entirely owned by us. So that's also why I think there's a running situation right now with AI. Is on one side, people are trying to run as fast before we discover that the value of the return on investment is not as high as we expect. By the way, it's obviously not as high as we expect because it's been oversold. And the problem is you don't want to be the first one to crash because of that. And the second thing is, I believe, is a lot of people are starting to think that AI of 2025, 26 is good enough to do most of the tasks we need. Nobody is going to write a PhD level document in science or anything. But most of us will say, oh, if I can translate this and summarize this and do this. And these are already software that existed. And these things are going to be put on our computers. So suddenly we will have an affordable personal intelligence with us. And this is also a narrative that most of these companies don't want because they invested literally a lot of money. I'm going to go back to that specific thing. So go back to Palantir. That's it. One other thing I find fascinating is this is a software that has been designed by a former Google person running. He was product manager at Google Maps, I think. And he recreated the first day of the war in Iran using only open source and public data. And he literally replicated everything that happened during the first day. Second day, people saw that and they flushed all the cache of everything. And someone quoted, oh, this is like Palantir Maven on, but generated, and he did that in 2 days. So the big question of all the companies, including Palantir and all these things, I wrote on my newsletter on the fact that I believe that in the future, software like Palantir makes no sense because you will come and say, can you generate me this software with that source of information and this and that and that? And suddenly you have the thing. This is a very concerning question for everyone that is in the mediation. About that, I have a more philosophical question. Let's think about you're at the CIA or the NSA or one of these things where you have a bunch or any agency, but these are the ones actually have access to the tools. You have smart people. Their job is they've done political science, different things. Most of them are their job is to give me the data. I'm gonna think. And if you remember in 2003, there was a Team B or something like I went to school like something like that, but basically was designed to recreate a narrative for the Department of Defense. So the narrative was we have to go to war because of this and that. And there were people, including at the CIA and other places, said, well, we have the data and we believe that it's BS and the mass destruction weapons are BS. Fast forward to 2026, just a few months ago, there was also a new war. And first of all, no pictures. And imagine that you have software that actually has been pre-deciding based on the source what the analyst should think. I'm not even talking about removing the analyst because you need the analyst because none of these things is easy. Unfortunately, we could have told some people that before they engage. But the thing is, suddenly the narrative that you will sell to the politics or to the world can be malleable now based on the data you have access. And suddenly, if you don't have access to all the data, if you don't have access, because the AI would filter some of it, or someone said, I don't want you to make sure that anyone at this agency or this division can actually figure out what's really going on, we're possibly happening. So the funny thing is the fight for disinformation was usually an outside fight. What do you see on your screen? Is it real or not? Now, who knows? But now, because of these tools and the power these tools have, you can have that battle of ideas and disinformation potentially within the companies, the agencies. Think about it, when Mythos, I mean, that was reported, a general told the senator that they installed Mythos at the NSA, and it basically hacked all the machine in a few hours. most of these machines are air-gapped and not available to the public. And I'm sure they were doing it, trying to look at for discrepancy between what they know and not. But the fact is that the power of this machine is becoming so important, and the ability to build stuff that matters with them is so important that most of large companies, agencies, governments do not understand. For example, let's say you have a mayor election like we had in Paris a few weeks ago. And instead of saying, oh, I heard this guy said something interesting, you just go and say, can I get access to all the minutes from the Paris Parliament? Can I have access to all the data, who's basically all the reports, the reports nobody reads? And I would say, I'm that age, I live in that address, this is my income, tell me what the mayor has done for me over the last 5 years. And suddenly you're going to have access to a level of intelligence that is completely new. That means that we are entering a system where potentially with the next election, the audience is as good as, because you can say, can you explain to me this report without the administrative bullshit and all the fluffy things? Suddenly you have access to a power that you didn't have. Because most of the time you look at the report, you don't even understand the summary. So you're like, okay, I give up. So we're entering an interesting battle, and this is why I think a lot of the companies who used to mediate this information will have a hard time. I don't know if Palantir is one of them, because they have a very structured relationship with the current government. But you can see that a lot of people are now starting to think, okay, this may not be the case. Anyway, so the big question is, how do we get the money? And I keep adding money. I've put 12 trillion. It's probably even more. Nobody knows, because that's the number one problem. Nobody knows. The credit is now hidden. There's private credit. Nobody knows who's funding the data centers, why. It actually, I was going to say it feels like 2008, but I asked a friend who was actually a banker back then, and he said, no, I think it's even worse. Because at the time, actually, we had the information to tell us something was wrong. And so now I have no idea. Can you imagine, for example, most of the deals, these deals, have been, some of them have been done without banks, bank, banque d'affaires, I don't know how you say, banks that are basically, so nobody knows exactly what are the terms. And the fact that people are lending money is not like, it's not a scam. It's just NVIDIA has so much money. Because of AI, they made so much money since 2023. I mean, I'm talking about hundreds of billions. Either the money sits, but where? Either they say, you know what, I'm going to lend OpenAI or this company money because I know they will buy our chip for next year. So it's not like lending out of a good heart. It's actually protecting the market share of the 2027 and 28. So, but beside that, it's another way of looking at it. It's fascinating because you don't really know what's going on. You have no idea. Nobody knows the terms. People are not stupid, you don't give 100 millions of money without specific contract. And so I don't think they're stupid. But the thing is, now we're in a system where, first of all, we don't know who's the weak link. Maybe Oracle could be, because they kind of invested a lot. But a lot of these companies, like CoreWave is a small player. A lot of these companies are basically, what they do is they promise we will build data centers. But now in America, just in America, you have 147, according to the New York Times, activist group who say, not in my backyard, because the one thing when there's a data center nearby your house, first your electricity bill raised by 175% average, and then you're not even sure if there's water. I think there was a data center was caught in Missouri sweeping 30 billion gallons of water without publicly declaring it, and so it's a nightmare. And I think the weakest link is not the companies. All these companies are making money, especially NVIDIA, who's basically turning these machines into. The thing is, the data center economy that is actually run by the most greedy and most short-term people is gonna look like The Big Short, the movie that we all should see just to see Anthony Bourdain talking about how the debt works. Just that is good enough. So there's the myth around AI, and the idea is it's an interesting is why do we need AI? Because that's the only question. Why do we put trillions of dollars in the economy? One of the things that's more like what DeepMind says is we're gonna use CPU and GPUs and to solve hard problems. We can have pharmaceutical companies doing the work, and it might work, it might not. It's changing the nature. Stéphane Malin, who's the gold medal of CNRS, just recently said that the way that he sees AI moving to mathematics is that even as a mathematician is asking himself not if mathematics will exist in the future, but if the work of a mathematician, like the way he is, it will change. Because the way these problems are solved is that you basically present, before you would go from nothing and try to demonstrate something. Now the machine demonstrates tons of things, and then you have to figure out that's what happened with AlphaFold. Oh, we folded we figure out all the possible combination. Now it's your job to see if there's money to make or if there's a discovery. So we are like in an interesting world where the research is now going backward. And I don't know if we're mentally equipped. I don't know if you know what I mean? Like, you have potential final result, and then you have to prove which of its potential final result is actually true. The idea of a synthetic workforce is an old myth. The idea that we will have human operators and non-human operators. The real question is organizing human operators, meaning employees and collaborators, to work together is already hard. Combining both is non-human and human is going to be very challenging. Imagine like sometime you're in an Amazon a warehouse and you have robots, and I'm sure you all know the story about this robot who had like an anti-bear repellent, and there was a hole, and the robot was just keep going, and everybody was falling. Literally, I don't know how many people had to be hospitalized because obviously the robot had no sense that and no harm out of this. Since they changed, but some people said at some point, if you have human operators with machines, the same in the army. Now you have people stuck in entrenched, waiting the 15 minutes during the morning and the evening where the drones don't really see very much, so you can actually go to the loo or do other things. So we're in an interesting meaning, kind of scary as well world. And a lot of people who think about this, they don't really think about how do we design a world where humans are guaranteed to be at no harm, even including intellectually. What happened if suddenly someone who used to be very good at his work, but because of AI, suddenly become the worst person, and hasn't changed. It's just the dynamic has changed, and nobody took care of making sure that person is comfortable in this new environment. So this is a lot of things. The beauty of AI is that there's the Swedish company called Lovable. They basically it's called a vibe coding app. You just say, let me build an app that looks like Uber for dogs, and then it generates the whole thing. What's fascinating is that the same app, if you change the model, it comes from being nice to being amazing. So right now, most companies that you see doing AI, they're not really trying to be the best in terms of the product or the software. They think that the next version of the AI will do the thing better. What they do is they're trying to target a specific niche. We're going back to the data mindset where you have an icon for one task and you want to be that icon. I'm hungry, click. I need to go somewhere, click. Now you're going to start to see verticals and people really working to do this. Everything works because of a thing called the law of scale. When I did AI in the 90s, I asked a friend, so what has changed? He said, nothing, it's just bigger, more data, more stuff. Nothing. Before, the internet was not indexed. Now you have a thing called Common Crawl, and you have open source platforms that allows you to basically have the entire content ever written. And soon, all the transcription of YouTube, but also, so what is fascinating is when you have all this data, the real question is, how do you make sure that it reflects the reality of the world we live in? This is why the alignment teams in any of these for me are the most crucial things. It's a weird world because to succeed, you need all the talent in the world, all the data. By the way, we're running out of data, public data in 2030. So we're introducing what we call synthetic data. It's like mostly an expansion of the world. So not only now we are going to have models and AI that runs on what they understood of the physical world, but now also what they also on the synthetic simulated expansion of the world. So it's kind of fascinating. Or the compute, the main problem is energy, as you probably already know. The grid in a, someone said it's an interesting thing. It's a 21st century industry running on a 19th century energy grid. And by the way, it's funny because since Reagan, only 2 nuclear plants were created in the US. And nobody has really thought about thinking about the grid for the people. But now everybody wants to do nuclear things, small reactor. It's kind of crazy how you move from building technology for the public benefit, and suddenly, because now a few companies need the energy, and they know they cannot disconnect a hospital or a school, because that would be one of the options on the table. I'm sure someone thought about it. Now suddenly we have to run and etc. So we're always in a system where 30 years of internet has not prepared us for this. I think what's fascinating beyond the fact that too much money is invested is that the level of impreparation. No planning, no vision of the future, no vision of how do we coexist in terms of energy and water and et cetera, et cetera. So it's an interesting system. And now I'm going to the interesting part is that what I found fascinating about the internet is the internet started during the globalization era. I mean, the post Cold War and the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it became actually, the internet became the poster child for the globalization. It is the globalization, literally. It's interesting to see that one country has to directly decided to disconnect itself. It was China 3 years later. First connection to the internet in 94, first disconnection to the internet 97. But my point is that we're entering now in a fascinating time because AI is starting at an age of apparent deglobalization. I say apparent because there's few things. First of all, this is the chip journey of, they always say a chip is made in Taiwan. This is, of course, not true. There's hundreds of companies, thousands of companies all around the world. Actually, it started in the UK with ARM. Then you have a company in the Netherlands called ASML, but this company was doing, the ultraviolet light. You need a laser from California. You need a lens from Zeiss in Germany. So basically, the coating of a chip is made in Korea or Japan. Some of the chemical products are made in Germany, France. So the idea that one country can actually contain the entire chip is just impossible. The other thing is, these are cable submarine. That's actually the reason I started my think tank. Is I wrote 6 years ago, what happened if we break the submarine cables for political reason, geopolitical reason? And what I didn't know is actually it happened in Estonia, between Estonia and Finland. But this is a real issue. Is that now, who can protect this? Who protects the satellites? How does it work? Because the internet was built on this idea that you're giving the data to the next chunk of the network, or give the data to the next chunk of the network, and everybody do that in good faith. That's a world that doesn't exist today. So how do you do, China and North Korea, we have these things where, the data comes in and it's a black hole, it disappears. But you can temper the data, you can delay the data. There's so many things now, but you have to think, because of course, there always been cyber attacks, all of that. But what's new now is that some people have an interest to destabilize the infrastructure. I'll give you an example. When the Iranian hit Bahrain, Qatar, and in the Emirates, they basically hit the free zone of AWS in the Middle East. Because as you know, you cannot store your data somewhere. You have to have 2 backups in different countries. What happened is the 3 of them. And why did they do that? And why do I think data centers are becoming a dual approach? Is that when AI companies worked in the war in Iran, the RGC said, here's a list of the companies that are now enemy of Iran and considered enemy combatant, including NVIDIA, Google, Anthropic, etc. So suddenly, if you cannot hit the company directly, you've got to hit probably their data centers, potentially also, I'm sure the protection of all the CEOs of these companies have been raised up, because suddenly you actually diminishing one side make it hard. One of the last thing I like to say about this is that we are entering an era where everything doesn't come from Silicon Valley anymore. Before, Silicon Valley would develop technology and spread it to the world, and everybody would either use it or copy it. Now, in China, we started seeing this with DeepSeek. We see that now with the new models. They have different places of innovation, and I think what we're going to see more in the future is, especially because when you have access to more intelligence, and when you start to see that the global interaction of the world is disaligned, and you don't have interest to do everything or give everything to another country that potentially could be your ally or potentially not, you don't know. We're going to start to see a lot of divergence of innovation, and we're seeing right now in Europe with digital sovereignty. You look at what happened in Ukraine. They are the #1 drone industry. They're the one, actually, the Emirates and all the people in the Gulf call now, because we know how to go against Shahid, because these are the one drones you actually get in Ukraine. So we want your expertise, not the US, not France, you guys. It's fascinating. And we are in this race in a way where you have 2 worlds that are basically organizing themselves. One is closed, and you have to pay for everything at the moment. It's the OpenAI, NVIDIA, Anthropic world. And then you have the Huawei and DeepSeek and Quen, Alibaba. And there's a big fight. Anthropic just today announced that they were trying to, they announced that Alibaba is using Claude to distill, to suck up the information. It's kind of funny that a company who basically rip off the entire planet in terms of creative content now is complaining that someone else is doing the same. But this is the world we live in. And the question for every country in the world is going to be, are we on one side or are we on 2? I personally believe that choice is going to be in a key point of the future. And unfortunately, the 2 systems have an advantage and disadvantage, but it's going to be an interesting question. My last slide is this. I'd like to, let me see now. So there's 3 directions to that. The #1 question is, we're going to see more and more means of production, digital production being pretty much seized by a few companies. And we don't know where it goes. Is it going to be available for everyone or not? Because what happened with Mythos being closed in the US to the rest of the world is that suddenly there's a, depending on who you are and where you are, you don't have access to the same technology. That used to be obvious in North Korea or Iraq back in the days, or Iran, but now it's becoming an issue for Europeans, for the rest of the world. So I think the movement to go local, these are 2 products that exist, that allowing people to run their AI locally or their companies. This is going to start growing, and eventually, I don't know if you're familiar with the dark forest theory in the internet. Okay, so there's a FreeBody, the book, the FreeBody solution. That is a paradox of it's a variation of Fermi paradox. If you're on a planet, you don't want to let everyone else know that you're alive, because they will come and eat you alive. Similar thing in the dark forest. If you're under the leaves, you better be very, very quiet, because predators will come. This is the forest is the internet. If you're public on Twitter, if you're let's say if you're if you're a researcher and you happen to be a woman or a color, you're gonna be harassed all day long with on Twitter or all the social network. I mean, and a lot of people are now retreating to a space that they control, that they feel safe. This is the reason a lot of people don't say anything on Twitter. They're just on WhatsApp, on emails, on that's the dark forest theory. And I think on AI and all other things, we're gonna move slowly into, we want to be local and we want to connect to source of truth. This is why archive.org, Wikipedia, these are very important assets because they are a source of truth. If they fail, we will be in a very different situation. And that is, I think, an interesting, because you always wonder, like, what is the good thing about the future is part of its technology will become local and accessible, and it may be that it doesn't mean to be the most important thing to do good work. And the question we will have is, do we need to keep going? And like what happened with the moon, it was a big race, and then eventually nobody goes anymore. And now when you talk about it, people say it makes no sense to send humans. So we completely failed that. I think the AI is in a very similar thing. It's a race, and at the end, we're going to see that a lot of the technology built is not as important in terms of background. And that's going to be, I think, the chance to build something different. Well, thank you.
Okay, great. So thank you again for both of your talks. We can start with some questions for the audience, unless either one of you have questions for each other to start.
I have a question. Do you really think that there's going to be a possibility of developing an AI that, for example, will truly give you the, I don't know what you said, the benefits that you have individually enjoyed from the actual policies that a candidate has enforced, or, for example, I don't know, commercially speaking, right? Capitalism is built on BS, like making advertising that you're providing this and that and not doing it so you can make more profit, or finding ways of, anyway, taking money out of your pocket without you having to provide the real service because it costs you. I mean, it's not an honest deal, let's say. So if AI could unmask that, that would be the abolition of competition, because there is no competition if there is a best person that can provide that service. And, you know, there's no need to have two, right?
Yes. Yes and no. I mean, first of all, the thing, AI is a non-deterministic model, and this is very different from if you look at the 70s, you know, Japan, automatization of work, mostly for immigration reasons. They didn't want to hire other people, so they decided to create robots. And it was a deterministic model. It means that it was designed, the same answer gives the same result. If it doesn't work, it's a bug, or it's a misstep, something. But it is an environment that we allow ourselves to automate. Now we're entering an era of non-deterministic automation, meaning that sometime it's going to be perfectly good, and sometime it's not, and we have no idea why, and we can't. And because of that, most companies right now have stopped trying to sell us, you know, this is the best product for you because of it's going to have the answer. What they're trying to say is that we have the best mechanism in place to actually make sure that the machine doesn't go crazy. What is interesting is, and that would have been in my other presentation, what is supposed to be you know, being in the scope of the regular usage. That is what people would expect. I call it hyper-conformism. So it's great for business, but if you're an artist and you use AI, this is the worst technology you want to have. You want the AI to go crazy. You want AI to go beyond the scope. And this is exactly what they're reducing. So to answer the question, I think we cannot be one winner. The question that we have to ask ourselves is the winning model a commercial, 100% commercial model like the US wants, where you pay for everything? And we will pay more because they think that the US model is that access to intelligence will cost more in the future. And China, for an interesting reason, has a different paradox, is access to intelligence should cost less. and they are both models are interesting because they have a business case, but the question that you have to ask yourself is that which of this model will win first, and then if the open source model wins, what I think has a high probability to happen, then the other question that will come is who's going to take control of this open source model to make money again. So it's more like a battle of which companies, because the Chinese company don't do that as well as the good of the heart. They really have the idea that potentially that's the entry point. It's kind of a intellectual dumping. We give you access to cheap intelligence, but one day we'll just switch it back to the to the right cost.
Thank you so much for these great presentations. So Tariq, I have a question also similar to Fulvia's. You were talking about how this, future of AI could enable us to get better access to some data, but at the same time, you did talk about essentially the enshittification of LLMs because of the kind of data that is used, because we're running not only of compute and energy, but we're running out of the data that can accelerate this AI getting better. So, well, and by the way, all the data that now all these corporations are looking for is more of the private data of insurance companies, of banks, and so on and so on. And there is a resistance, but eventually some of these platforms will maybe give in. So on the one hand, how could this be even reliable? To think about an individual citizen drawing some conclusions, as you gave an example in the mayoral elections, if there is all this enshittification of increasingly and co-homogenization and so on. And then you mentioned the question of running it locally. Well, first of all, I mean, maybe we should discuss something like, maybe nationalization of these platforms, as opposed to privatization, because what would be, the oversight of these, because then, if it's all just privatized, you mentioned Palantir, and of course, now we have situations like the project Maven and misidentifying of a school based on the old data, and, we're going to have, it's not that this problem will be eliminated. I think as long as it's not, for example, well, there's some kind of oversight, like maybe nationalization was a question mark. How do you see this, localization? So, and is one of the solutions, for example, something like the consensus.app, like this, there are now this new agents that are only based, for example, on scientific articles that are peer reviewed, as opposed to just all this enshittified AI slop. So yeah, what do you think about that?
I think enshittification is real, and it's also happening in not only the LLM, but in the video production. I was surprised that the founder of, the CEO of Instagram said that he finally recognized that putting slop with real human content could not only confuse the people, but people come less because nobody actually wants to watch slop. It can be fun for some time, but most of the time it's the misappropriation of what it is. What you said earlier about the fact that not only all the data that were basically taken, especially in image and video, correspond to the era of mass advertising and hyper commercialization, and what I found fascinating with some artists is when they say we have to play with the bias, it means that we have to, for example, you ask to draw an Indian woman giving birth, she's gonna give birth on the floor, and if you ask the same thing with a European woman, she's going to be in the hospital, and you wonder how is it possible that. And by the way, people who do these models have no idea. They're trying to remove it, and then you have to play with the bias. And I think accessing the right information become almost like an archaeology work, where eventually the truth will be something of archaeology. You eventually in the world, but where slop has overtaken the world. But I want to go back to what you were saying about the usage and how these companies are operating. I think none of these companies have a way out. So nationalization is actually a plan, but not in the way you think. Right now, what they say is we should use the social security endowment of the US and invest it in OpenAI and its companies, because everyone will benefit. What you're saying is different, is that if access to intelligence is as important as accessing to water, etc., how do we make sure every country, every citizen in the world, at least in the country, has access to intelligence? And this is a question none of the existing president and governments that I've talked or seen and actually tried to answer, even in the US. The only thing that's happened is I think in Emirates, they said we'll give a free ChatGPT $20 for every citizen, but I don't know if it's the only answer to that.
Before we move on, I wanted to ask Fulvia how these questions then relate to some of the things that you were bringing up earlier about magnifications of biases and, who is included in this conversation as well, related to those questions.
Well, I think this is a kind of an expert take on AI, which I said I wasn't going to provide because I don't have the knowledge that obviously Tariq has, and it's extremely interesting to see at work these interest and these inner contradictions of this stage of capitalism, where we have questions like, yes, we should nationalize, but the nation is actually an informal federation of all the corporation and the productive taxpayers that keep it up. And in fact, it's a non-efficient one because bureaucracy is structurally corrupt. And so China, whose a state that is an empire in these regards, individual freedoms might be more honest and efficient in this respect and maybe more ethically respectable. I mean, all of these questions are embedded in the philosophical dilemmas that I was trying to bring up, that are that AI is in a way the portrait of what we are today, which is generally a fascist-driven society, especially in the West, structurally racist, because the way we've been globalized practically does not correspond to our emotional and cultural resources to relate with each other. There's a very small minority of the population that has internationalist feelings and a real passion for humankind, because what I was exactly trying to tackle is that this solipsistic philosophy of Zonrettel is the philosophy that we're all brought up with. We have emotional enclosures, and we are all in patriarchy, men and women together. So it's not a problem of men, it's a problem of or women's or trans. It's a problem of how we relate with each other and now how we relate with the machines, what we think the world is. I mean, there is a whole part that I didn't have time to talk about, but it's that, in fact, Dreyfus, the philosopher that wrote with Rabineau the hermeneutics of Foucault, has been working closely with the early developer of large language models, and he was arguing that we should really bring back Heidegger in the equation, because the way he has considered the world and the ready to hand is the most productive way to imagine the role of AI, which is a role related to being present in a context, which is what AI does and doesn't do. But these are, socioeconomic and philosophical problems at the same time, that the access to AI and the way in which it is a subject of speculation don't solve and aggravate. So it does relate perfectly to what I was saying. I mean, it wasn't a troglodyte approach, although it could have sounded Luddite, but I mean, I was just trying to enlighten the human aspect of how we receive the end of this commercial adventure.
I actually have a question for you, because how do you see the fact that so there's the word that I came, but is now becoming popular, is the permanent underclass, the idea that in a post or AI world, a majority of the people could be completely disconnected from the value creation, and therefore there is a lot of these CEOs are floating the idea of a universal basic income, and kind of taking to the left traditionally as a so as a solution to that? How do you see that the fact that in a way we're kind of using a little bit of a want to turn that into a kind of a techno-socialism dream when it's actually a purely capitalist endeavor?
But I don't know if it is. I mean, it is a dream to have a great and humane organization of work, but I'm not seeing any AI model being gifted with the empathy, and the attempts they make are pathetic for obvious reasons. So I think they work better as drones for killing people, for example, which seems to work like a charm. So I don't think, and I would love if it was possible, that AI can rationalize the world of work and make it an ethical place and reduce the physical effort for humankind. But I brought up Zonretel also because it talks about intellectual and manual labor as a major taboo, because we have global slaves or slaves of bringing food from an app to our body in the streets and being pushed around by nasty kids. And we have contemporary slavery, people without papers, people being arrested by ICE, genocide, whatever. We have extremely barbaric phenomena coming up everywhere. My own country is deporting people to Albania, preventing people from saving refugees in the sea off of the coast of where I live. So we have extremely primitive phenomena happening parallel to these other phenomena that, I don't know, we wrote a small paper once that spoke about the courteous love as the highest form of human abstraction and poetry and incredible elevation, mystical too, happening at the same time as the worst famines were happening in the streets. Corpses were literally littering the space outside of the houses of Cavalcanti, Dante, and all of these people that were talking about the divine love. So humans are mysterious, and I am a little bit scared. That's also, if there is a techno-socialism coming up, anything but the racist Nazism that we are living through, it might be better. Jan, I had a question for you.
Question from Jan over here. You can use this mic.
Okay, thank you very much for both of you for the very complete, and we could spend 3 hours discussing it. So I will not deal with the things, Claire, you have mentioned, because they are, quite complex and should deserve a more expansive thing. But going back to Tariq, very vivid and provocative exposure, I will maybe express some doubts when he opposes in his last sketch or slides, let's say, the two models, the Chinese and the American models. Because when you oppose DeepSeek with the others, the American models, I think some researcher, like my good friend Cassili or others, have shown that DeepSeek is a sort of trick. That is, you cannot compare the Chinese system as an open source system for everyone, not being paid everywhere. For one reason first, that is, you must take into account the huge investment made in the apparatus of state and control of population that makes available for the state those data, including personal data, at a level that has never been reached in human history. Second, it has been demonstrated that DeepSeek has been playing a very clever game on most advances, Guangzhou region, Shenzhen region, zone of development of very refined engineering problems and so on, very inventive, and a use that I would say, the most dirty capitalist would not have done, or I compare, yes, sorry, the stupid French capitalist have made the same use of, artificial intelligence, monitoring of Grand Magasin or any places, using, and they said, you are everything is controlled by a program, artificial intelligence, whereas, in fact, the treatment of the data were done where? In Madagascar, in houses where people, like proletariat, that is, this kind of thing would have enchanted Engels and Marx, when for $50 a day, people are working 40 hours to recognize, examine the photo by working, living work, and examining if in this photo the guy who's picking up something is stealing or not stealing. And he will, and for DeepSeek, it has been the same mechanism of China using entire zone of very low development on the countryside to feed up DeepSeek. So I think, and another point in your very brilliant expose was probably the fact that I've not heard of the battle of the common, of the law, of the open source battle, and the fact that, as you may have noticed, European community has identified as a crucial point the fact of combating or striking against the re-enclosure by the big multinational of all the open source that had been opened by people acting in the website at the very local and practical level you have mentioned. In the last, maybe Thierry Breton, I'm not fond of him, but he's the first one, European, to have been banished by the first democracy of the world, is forbidden to enter in the United States because he proposed a very simple thing, that those precious US company, but also Chinese company, will have to pay for the use of the common space of user of the internet at all levels. So I think maybe with those two corrections, it's not a critic in fact, but with the slight part, you could maybe have a more less provocative thing that we have to choose between the US, where you pay everything, and China, where everything is for free, which I know is the most incredible thing, because if there is a place where you pay for everything and you give all your data to the state, to the police directly, because in China, the state is but the pure police, as the most totalitarian state we have ever experienced in the world, compared to which Stalin is a stupid guy. So I think this is very important, because otherwise your dichotomy will create a feeling of panic in the people, in as much as you propose at the end, okay, let's go local, my dear. Let's retreat in the dark forest of the night. Don't bother, don't let us dig our little, space, like the famous bien creusée vieille taupe of Marx. So that's my proposal.
I'll get back to you a few things. First of all, I sadly believe open source as a form, and I grew up in open source. I've been an active user of Linux since day one, and contributed to it, built the OS based on it, etc. I think open source is dead because of AI slop. Now you ask anyone who has a project, they say the number of AI contribution is so big that most small operated, I'm not talking about the big open source like Google stuff and Facebook, are becoming are at threat. The second thing about what you said about a lot of what you talk about in data is about what I call big data, not really AI. I always believed that I've been believing that for the last 20 years, that big data is a fraud. It never really a fraud. I never believed in it. I don't think it works. I think people are pushing that narrative because it's a good narrative, but at the end of the day, I don't think it works that well. Regarding the CEOs of the large companies, a friend of mine explained to me very briefly why people are laying off. Imagine you're a CEO of a large company today, and there's AI. AI is supposed to increase productivity, right? Am I able to demonstrate the market that I can use AI to increase productivity? Of course not. That will be the guy after me. So in the meantime, I play the oldest trick in the book. I lay off people and the stock goes up. So we see a lot of people who basically believe that it's a panic right now. Every CEO of large companies in panic because they agree to that dream that we're going to make it better, increase productivity, and they're like, I have no clue how to do it.
Is because they're not having to pay 401ks for their employees. They don't have to pay health insurance. They don't have to deal with the recidivism. People not showing up. It's not because it's more productive. And also in the United States, there's a lot of pushback right now. In the state of New York, in the House of Representatives, there was a election in which the main thing that was, the main whatever was AI or no AI. And the AI companies supplied the candidate who was okay with AI with $9.2 million against the candidate who was against AI. And the guy who was almost against AI, he almost won. So there we have a tremendous amount of digi-washing also. A tremendous amount of digi-washing. Digi-washing is like greenwashing, where you see Shell Oil having a commercial, how they're saving the environment. In digi-washing, we have all of this, thing where you should give your kid or have your kid have AI on their phone. We should all definitely remove AI from our phone and never write with it. Okay? That's how I feel. Okay? So screw it. Screw all this stuff you're talking about.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I
just wanna-
think it's capitalism at its worst. And I'm infuriated. I'm sorry.
I think we have a question from Martha that follows this. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I'm switching gears just a tiny bit, but something I was thinking about last night during Anna's talk when she was talking about vector space, and some of the things that I think about, I'm really switching over kind of to the affective, and I was really thinking about it with Fulvia and mentioning the word sympathy, but then I'm also thinking about it with Tariq and your background in hacking. Is, if you have weighted vectors and you have temperature, and these kind of controls on AI, just a week ago or so, I was listening to a podcast. You have to get a lot of AI information on podcasts now. And I can't remember who it was. It's very anecdotal, but it was a tech person who said that when they used Claude, they got the best results when they said, they gave the prompt and then they said, I love you, take your time. And they got the best results out of it. And so I'm thinking about this for both of you in terms of either some kind of I mean, the point being that people are sort of waking up to the way these work, and so is there any way out of the outside instead of just the surround where we don't have any sort of agency within the agentic AI universe?
Hard to say. I mean, these machines are really good at faking emotion. I think everything they do is fake. And the point is, I should have probably said that earlier, is that I believe that these tools are going to be an interesting partner to prototype ideas. But I do not believe that these things should be in charge of anything. Again, when I say non-deterministic, what I mean is that we're entering a world where we will allow things to go wrong. We've seen that in the military. You're absolutely right. What is most terrifying about what happened with the Maven system is 45 seconds to make a decision. Who can make a decision in 45 seconds? I mean, and also the fact, I believe that AI is becoming more and more a tool for letting the machine take the burden of the decision for me. And that's why I'm very scared I'm an interface person. So my point is, I believe that some part of these tools will be interesting to build stuff. Most of it, I still believe, is BS. So I believe the previous generation of big data, it didn't. But the reason I decided to take a distance from the world of technology is because what I see, I don't believe, and I see people talking about it, and I still don't believe. But what is interesting is that if you want part of that, the question is going to is do we still take the hard decisions? And leadership has always also been through making the hard decisions, or do we allow this tool to take the burden? And this is for me, it's what we saw with what happened in the current war and AIification of war is even more concerning because it's not even the fog of war. There's no fog. It's like the absence of making decision. And this is, I think, the most concerning part of it. So there's no empathy. And there's also, even if there's studies, but I don't believe in studies anymore on AI, saying that people use AI would be more empathetic because they're talking to someone who's being nice to them, but this is all fake. But the real question for me is like, how do we make a decision when everyone around you say, oh, you should let the machine decide? Sorry.
I could say something, I mean, regarding Claude and the best results, right? So humans are humans, and we don't know what it means yet because we're not investigating it. We don't give a crap. We're not putting any money in education. We're not putting any money in healthcare. We're taking them out in all the countries that I can think of. We don't give a crap about the refugees, the fragile persons, children. There is absolutely no interest in investigating humans, and humanities and art schools, as a matter of fact, are shrinking because you've got to learn a profession out there. And being a human is no profession. So, of course, this creates a ground for bigotry, for religion, and we've got that too. And our self-worth is harder and harder to assess as persons. I mean, because the job market is another thing altogether, and it's not an easy place to be. So humans have powers. We do have powers. They're not paranormal powers. They're not supernatural powers. They are incredible powers. We can organize. We can transform each other. We can heal each other. We can make worlds. Worlds are what we do with stuff and with each other. Of course, capitalism wants us to forget about our agency in our bodies and in our capacity of being humans because they want us to consume. They want us distracted. They want us absorbed by something else that has nothing to do with us, and is going to leave us depleted, and certainly is going to separate us from our body and from our powers. So I'm not talking in praise of magic, but I'm just saying that if you have an energy field, and if within this morphic field, it's called according to people that believe in quantum discoveries or in other ways of approaching living creatures, that object in your hands, your phone, is also loaded with energies and with electricity, and it is a magic object, definitely. And if you invest it positively and you make this magic spell, you might obtain a better result, or the result might look better to you. Does it matter if it's true or not? I think what matters is the whole procedure that one does to oneself in order to get the result that you want. And in my opinion, as I said, the way these electronic devices are being engineered is consciously a way to separate us from each other and from ourselves. This is a terrible danger. I have a young child and I know what I'm talking about. So I think this is something that we should all think about together, switching off our phones and find more and more times to do this, because it's becoming very urgent, and it's a matter of skills. And people are hardly employable now because they're lacking what they call soft skills, but they're human skills, because they don't practice their relationality, because they don't have occasions to do so, and they don't have desire to do so, because their needs are artificially fulfilled by these machines. And that's why I made the comparison with the drugs that deplete you, because they are created to create a dependency, but it's a new dependency, and we don't know what this addiction is going to cause. We don't know it. So I'm just thinking that if we can slow it down, if we can reflect on it, make our own think tanks as parents, as people, as humans, maybe this is the task of the future. And I would say we have started in a small way and we want to go ahead. And I think it's something that we need also to reappropriate the means of production of ourselves, which seem to be the most precious ones now.
I think we need to wrap that up today, but that is a great place to start to continue our discussion tomorrow. So thank you again to Claire Fontaine, Fulvia, and Tariq Krim. And we will have our next session tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock. So thank you very much.